Good morning, everyone. Wishing you all a joyful and peaceful new day. In the previous episode, the single mother Hoai Ca returned to her little home after a devastating flood. Thanks to the help of the villagers and Mr. Hung, she began to gradually restore the place that was once a warm haven for her and her son. Although Hung had kindly offered for her and her child to stay longer in his well-furnished house to avoid hardship, Hoai Ca still chose to return to her humble home, where nature, the chickens, a few rabbits, and quiet memories of the two of them remained. Will Hoai Ca have the strength to revive her battered home? And when the past suddenly returns, what will happen? Don't go anywhere. Stay with us to continue this deeply emotional journey with Hoai Ca. That morning, before the last drops of dew had dried from the sky, Hung was already busy preparing for the day. Between taking Tony to school and stopping by his office early, he still took a few minutes to sit with Hoai Ca. Gently, he reminded her to harvest the remaining lychee tree in front of the house so he could have someone come and level the ground. To keep an eye on the backyard where more soil was being filled in. And most importantly, to not forget breakfast. It was the same voice, not loud, not long-winded, just a few brief words. But they softened her heart, like the morning sunlight filtering through the beetle trees at the gate. In his quiet concern, Hoai Ca realized something. Sometimes, the most sincere care comes from the simplest things. She smiled gently and nodded. Though she said nothing, her heart swelled with quiet gratitude. But she also knew this was the moment she had to stand up for herself again, take care of everything on her own, just as she always had. After Hung and Tony left, Hoai Ca slung the empty basket over her shoulder, put on her conical hat, and quietly headed out. The path leading back to her little house was still muddy from the flood, but her steps were steady. Along the way, the trees bent slightly, as if bowing in welcome to the one who once called this place home. Her basket was empty, her sandals caked with dirt, but her heart was full of determination. She wasn't returning to rest, she was returning to begin again, from the smallest things. The little house appeared beyond a cluster of bamboo, its roof still torn, the walls stained with traces of mud. Without a word, she picked up a dull knife and an old basket, and walked around to the back. The early breeze rustled through her shirt, carrying the earthy scent of post-rained soil and the faint sound of roosters crowing from the nearby village. By the stream's edge, a banana tree had fallen during the flood, roots twisted up, leaves shredded, the trunk soft and soaked. She bent down, cleared the dry debris, and selected the still white tender part of the trunk. Slice by slice, the circles of banana stem fell neatly into the basket, pure, even, like the quiet rhythms of a life that asked for nothing more than endurance and meaning. A while later, the slices were mixed with bran in an old plastic bucket. Hoai Ca carried it to the yard and poured it into the trough. Chickens and ducks flocked in, chirping, pecking, jostling one another to eat. Surrounded by her flock, Hoai Ca didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Perhaps it was these lively sounds, these eager beaks, that gently warmed her weariness, after the animals had eaten and scattered like children after a meal. She set the empty bucket aside, and quietly made her way to the water tank behind the house. She quietly bent down and began scooping out each decaying twig, each floating scrap on the water's surface with practice. Once the old water was drained, she opened the valve of a narrow pipe connected to the side of the house. Fresh water rushed in, clear and cold, echoing with a soothing sound as it filled the tank. By the time the sun climbed higher and spilled through the gaps in the lychee tree's leaves, clusters of deep red fruit peeked out like hidden invitations. Hoai Ca gently pulled the bamboo ladder from under the thatched shelter, propped it securely against the tree, then climbed slowly, steadily, without hesitation. Up above, The ripe fruit swayed in the sunlight, calling her back like old friends. They were round, firm, sweet, a reward after days spent soaked in flood water. She weaved between thick branches, her hands skillfully selecting the finest bunches and placing them into the basket on her back. Her eyes shone with quiet focus, her movements fluid yet gentle, like someone who had long learned to do much with very little. At times, she had to stretch further, clutching tightly to sturdy branches, her small frame leaning into the light. In that moment, among the green canopy, the breeze, and the sun, she looked like a supple branch herself, swaying, but unbroken, never yielding to fear or fatigue. Below, the filtered sunlight scattered across fallen leaves and cast soft shadows of ripe lychees onto the earth. With every bunch that landed in her basket, another piece of hope was gathered, not some grand dream, but a quiet certainty. As long as there is fruit to pick and a path to the market, life will go on, and effort will not be in vain. When the lower branches were bare, she climbed higher still. Her hands didn't stop, her eyes didn't dull. That woman, fragile in frame, but fierce in heart, seemed to know no fear. She only knew that if she could pick just a few more, sell just a bit more, then maybe tomorrow would be lighter, and laughter would return to her home. By the time the basket on her back was full to the brim, she set it down beneath the eaves. Noon sunlight streamed through the leaves, dappling the ground and her sunburned face, where beads of sweat still clung. She carefully laid out the bunches in front of her. The lychees, round and red, glistened like droplets of sun held in the palm. Hoai Ca began sorting, picking out the finest ones, grouping them, tying them neatly with thin strings. Each knot she tied was firm, deliberate, the same way she met life, quietly, but with unshakable resolve. The wind drifted in from the fields, lifting the hem of her faded shirt. Behind her, the roof still hadn't been fully repaired. In front of her were neat bundles of fruit, ready for the market, but in the center of it all was the image of a woman wrapping up the strongest parts of herself, with weathered hands, and a spirit that would not break. As the sun climbed even higher, Hoai Ca slipped on her conical hat, heaved the heavy basket onto her back, and stepped out through the gate. The dirt road to the market still bore the marks of old storm tires, but today, the sky was clearer than ever. The roadside village market had begun to stir. Hoai Ca found a small patch of ground beneath a tree, spread out a white cloth, and laid her bundles of crimson lychees in neat rows. The morning sun lit up the fruit, making them even more enticing, glistening as if coated in honey. It didn't take long for her first customer to arrive. A woman on a motorbike stopped, crouched down to inspect the fruit. Hoai Ca smiled gently, weighed the fruit, wrapped them carefully, and handed the bag to her with both hands. Then came a man on a motorbike. He chose a large bundle without bargaining. Another woman stopped to sample a lychee, nodded in approval, and bought a generous bunch. And so, one by one, the bundles began to disappear, exchanged for smiles and words of gratitude. Sweat began to soak through the back of her shirt, but Hoai Ca's face still wore a soft smile. Even as the sun grew harsher, she remained warm and attentive, as if each bunch of lychees she sold was more than just seasonal fruit, but a quiet thank you to life for giving her another chance to begin again. Amid the bustle of the market, the sight of a woman in a conical hat sitting quietly beside her rows of radiant lychees felt like a gentle note in a noisy morning symphony. She didn't need to shout or call out. Her sincerity in her gaze, in the way she tied each bunch, spoke for itself. While Hoai Ca busied herself with sales, back at her home, the low rumble of a diesel engine echoed through the quiet air. A large truck rolled onto the lot beside her little house, followed by a heavy yellow excavator, growling like a mechanical beast awakened after the storm. Loads of soil were dumped, filling in the low, eroded ground by the stream. The excavator moved deliberately, its arm swinging in rhythm, smoothing out the earth, creating a new foundation for the garden that had been washed away. Then through the thin haze of dust, Hung appeared, not in his crisp uniform, but in a sweat-soaked t-shirt, pants rolled up, machete in hand. He walked the garden slowly, carefully inspecting each corner. Where lychee branches blocked the way, he trimmed them neatly and stacked them by the roots. The leftover fruit that fell with the cut branches, he gently picked up and shared with the workers, a small gesture of warmth and camaraderie. When the land was leveled, Hung picked up a broom and began sweeping the front yard and small shelter. Fallen leaves, caked mud, broken twigs, all were gathered into a corner. He stood the old bamboo table upright, arranged the stools neatly under the thatched roof, then took a slow look around. He gave a small nod, his eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction, not because he had done anything grand, but because now the home of Hoai Ca looked just a little less chaotic than before. When Hoai Ca returned, the basket on her back now empty of lychees, she paused for a moment at the sight before her. The yard had been swept clean, the ground now level and firm. The scattered tools and garden items had all been put back in place, and amidst that quiet space, Hung was bent over, driving a bamboo stake into the soft earth near the edge of the stream. She didn't call out. She simply stood there, allowing the quiet emotion to settle gently into her chest. Hung looked up and smiled softly. "You're back. How did sales go?" The sun had mellowed, and the yard had mostly dried after the passage of the excavator. Under the simple thatched shelter, two small wooden stools sat across from each other. Hoai Ca poured water into two old plastic cups and placed them on the table. Hung sat across from her, his hands still dirt-streaked, his hair damp with sweat, yet his gaze was as calm and warm as it had been that same morning. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a familiar kind of quiet, the kind shared by those used to working side by side, used to carrying weight without needing to speak of it. Hung was the first to break the silence. His voice was low, steady. "This land, it's yours now. It might cost a little more, but I think we should start fresh. We'll raise the back foundation to prevent flooding when the rains return." Hoai Ca listened without interrupting, her eyes resting on a streak of sunlight spilled across the tabletop. She gave a gentle nod, as if each word was slowly sinking into her, without rush or doubt. Hung continued, as if to reassure her, "Don't worry about the costs. I called someone I trust, the rate's fair. If anything's missing, I'll handle it, just leave it to me." Hoai Ca looked up, there was a trace of emotion in her eyes, though her expression remained composed. "If there's not enough, just use the money I gave you last time. I still want to share the load with you." But Hung shook his head gently. "I'm saving that for Tony. I can still manage on my own, don't worry about it." The words weren't grand, nor did they try to prove anything. But to Hoai Ca, they felt like a shelter, more reassuring than any promise ever spoken. The wind whispered gently through the bamboo fence, and the thatched roof above swayed ever so slightly. Beneath that patchwork shade sat a woman, trying to rise again after the storm, and a man, quietly clearing the path so she could move forward. Hung glanced at his watch, then slowly rose from his seat. "I've got to head back to the station. You stay here and keep an eye on the workers. I'll drop by again this afternoon." Hoai Ca nodded, her eyes following his figure as he disappeared down the dusty path. She didn't call after him, didn't try to hold him back. And yet, in that brief moment, she realized something, that true connection didn't always need words. The morning passed gently. After seeing Hung off, Hoai Ca didn't rest. She picked up her hoe and continued flattening the small bumps left in the yard, clearing bits of debris scattered around the shelter. Each stroke was firm, measured, as if every movement was part of her silent resolve to rebuild her life. No one had to remind her, no one needed to help. Independence had become second nature to her, a habit born from years of facing things alone. When the work was done, she sat on the familiar bamboo chair beneath the thatched roof, unwrapped a small piece of bread for a late lunch. A simple meal, surrounded by a half-finished landscape, and yet, it was the imperfection of that moment that made her feel strangely at ease. It was familiar. It was hers. Meanwhile, in a neat, quiet home far away from the mud and mess, Diep, the man who had once shared a chapter of youth with Hoai Ca, and father to little Tony, was wiping down a polished wooden table in the center of the living room. The space was spotless, orderly, calm, everything that Hoai Ca's world currently was not. A soft click of the door. His sister had just returned from work. She removed her shoes, folded her umbrella, and stepped inside with visible concern on her face. Without delay, she spoke up. This morning, she had been assigned to help compile the list of households affected by the storm. And on that list was Hoai Ca's name. Her house was close to the stream. No one knew if she had been able to evacuate in time. She proposed that they visit and bring some money to help, just in case things were worse than expected. Diep listened, his face tightening with worrying. He didn't hesitate. He urged his sister to leave immediately. While she went inside to grab her purse, he sat back down, weighed down by a heaviness in his chest. The rumors he'd heard lately drifted through his mind, that Hoai Ca might have someone new, a police officer. But things weren't going well. The man's mother didn't approve, and was making life difficult. And Hoai Ca, she still loved truly deeply. While the man himself might not be strong enough to protect her. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The air remained damp, but the sky was beginning to clear. "Let's go, sis," Diep said as his sister reappeared at the door. "If the roads are bad, we'll walk the rest of the way." Beneath the humble thatched shelter, Hoai Ca sat quietly, taking small bites of bread after a long, exhausting day. She didn't say a word, simply chewed in silence, her eyes fixed on the front yard slowly drying after the rain. Suddenly, the sound of a car stopping quietly at the small gate broke the stillness. The first to step out was her former sister-in-law, neat in appearance, her eyes clouded with worrying she hadn't yet learned to hide. Following close behind was Diep, holding a small bag in one hand. In that moment, time seemed to skip a beat. Hoai Ca froze. Her hands paused midair, the piece of bread still hovering near her mouth. Then, without a word, she slowly set it down. Her face didn't show much emotion, only a quiet gaze that dipped ever so slightly, as if an old memory had stirred beneath the surface. Her sister-in-law walked quickly toward her, her expression a mix of concern and quiet sorrow. Diep remained behind, silent, unable to lift his eyes to meet the gaze of the woman who had once given up so much because of him. They sat down at the bamboo table under the shelter, the very same table that had just witnessed a warm, silent exchange that morning, now witnessing a much more unexpected reunion. It was the sister-in-law who spoke first. Her voice was soft but urgent, recounting how she had been tasked with compiling a list of families affected by the flood, and how Hoai Ca's name had appeared on it. Ever since, she admitted, her heart had been uneasy. Diep stayed quiet, listening, and when he learned that Hoai Ca and Tony were safe, his expression softened, a small wave of relief washing over his face. He didn't speak much, but worrying lingered in his every nod, in every glance. After checking on her situation, Diep reached into the bag and placed a small bundle of cash on the table. He said it was just a little help, hoping she'd accept it to ease her burdens, but Hoai Ca shook her head and refused. She thanked them both for their kindness, but insisted that she was managing. All she needed was to fence off her garden again. The rest, she said, would fall into place in time. Her sister-in-law tried again to persuade her, but Hoai Ca remained firm. And in a quiet moment, when she looked away, Du slipped the money into the basket beside her silently, without a word. It was no longer the gesture of a husband. It was the act of someone who had once been close, who had made mistakes, and who now only wished to make amends, quietly, without expecting anything in return. The conversation ended as dusk began to settle. They stood, offered their goodbyes, and said they would return again if needed. The silver car disappeared around the bend, leaving behind a thin cloud of dust drifting through the fading afternoon light. Hoai Ca stood still, eyes fixed on the path, as if needing one last confirmation that the visitors had truly gone. The wind carried, with it the scent of damp earth and ripened lychees, the smell of one season passing, and another quietly arriving. Life would go on, the house would be repaired, the garden would bloom again, Tony would grow up. And she, too, would keep moving forward, just as she always had. Another day had come and gone, no noise, no drama. Yet somehow, it felt complete, for those who still held on to faith. But how long could that peace last? When the past still holds loose ends, and the future remains uncertain. Ahead of her lies a path of difficult choices, and perhaps, wounds once thought healed, may begin to bleed again. What will happen when the ones from before truly return? Will Hung be strong enough to stay by her side, despite all opposition? Don't miss the next episode of Hoai Ca, where unspoken truths will finally begin to surface.
Một ngày nữa lại trôi qua, không ồn ào, không kịch tính, nhưng đủ đầy với tất cả những ai vẫn còn niềm tin. Thế nhưng liệu sự bình yên ấy có giữ được bao lâu? Khi quá khứ vẫn còn những điều chưa khép lại và tương lai thì chẳng hề dễ đoán. Ở phía trước, những lựa chọn khó khăn đang chờ đợi Hoai Ca, và cũng có thể những vết thương tưởng đã lành lại một lần nữa rớm máu. Liệu điều gì sẽ xảy ra khi những người cũ thực sự quay trở lại? Liệu anh hùng có đủ vững vàng để ở lại bên mẹ con cô bất chấp mọi khó khăn? Đừng bỏ lỡ Hoai Ca tập tiếp theo, nơi những điều chưa nói sẽ dần được hé lộ.